Good morning. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. I'm pleased to be joined here by colleagues in the executive branch here in the county government, our Deputy County Executive, Ken Jenkins, our Director of Operations, Joan McDonald, a number of other key executives, Chief of Staff, and others here. We're joined by leadership in the Westchester County Board of Legislators. The Chairman, Ben Boykin, is here. Majority Whip Mary Jane Shimsky is with us. Legislators Margaret Kunzio and Nancy Barr are here as well. And we have with us the mayors of the city of White Plains, Tom Roach, and the mayor of the city of New Rochelle, Noam Bramson. And we appreciate you taking time from your busy day to join us. Just on January 18th, just a few weeks ago, in the vicinity of 2 weeks ago, Con Edison announced that as of March 15th, less than 60 days, it would no longer be accepting any new natural gas hookups in most of its Westchester territory. There's a small string of counties, towns across the northern strip of Westchester that are not applied, but the bulk of the communities of Westchester and the bulk of the residents of Westchester County would be affected by this moratorium, which would be implemented by their indication on March 15th. This was a quick announcement. We considered a very abrupt announcement. We immediately reached out to Con Ed leadership, and we asked to have a meeting to brief all of our local governments, the county government, all of the towns, cities, and village governments, which we did have last Thursday. Con Edison was accommodating. They made a presentation to us, and then we had questions and answers. A meeting lasted about 2 hours over in Con Edison's headquarters over in Rye. But pretty clearly, this moratorium is a serious move that will impact development in Westchester County, and not just the county-sponsored programs where we have IDA support for different projects, but specifically what will happen in each of the towns and cities and villages, and particularly our major cities, where development has been very much a part of the lifeline of their economic revival efforts. You see that economic revival in New Rochelle, you see it in White Plains, you see it in Yonkers, and a moratorium of no new hookups would create a very chilling effect on that. The utility cited increased demand for natural gas due to construction of new buildings, and also customers who've converted from oil to natural gas options. And of course, that was an emphasis that the utility was advancing. They wanted us to make that transition, and we know that in the hierarchy of pollution, natural gas is superior to traditional oil, which is superior to coal. We haven't yet gotten to where we need to get as a society, but in terms of the relative situation, that transition meant that there was that much more usage and reliance on natural gas. And now we find that the natural gas supply, as they indicated, may not be sufficient. So we have an obligation as a county government to respond to this. It is not within our authority as a county government, nor for any of the cities, towns, or villages to be able to impose any response on Con Edison. The regulatory control of Con Edison exists at the state level of government. The Public Service Commission, whose members are appointed by the governor, are the ones that have real regulatory authority. You recall when we had our issues last year about service delivery for electricity, it was the governor and members of the PSC that spoke about their authority to make sure that utilities perform the responsibilities that they have. However, we'd be derelict in our duties in county government if we didn't bring together the other local governments and try to plan, excuse me, as a group of how we're going to respond to this. So a few steps that we're going to take immediately, and then what happens to follow will depend on what kind of progress we make. After I finish going over some of these different points, I'm going to invite Mayor Roach and Mayor Bramson to speak with you from their perspective of what the moratorium could mean in their respective cities, the kind of developments that they're working on, and what that impact is. And then if Chairman Boykin would like to talk on behalf of the Board of Legislators, he will be invited to do that. Then we'll open it up to questions as a group. And then finally, as always, if anyone from the media wants to interview any of us individually, you'll be welcome to do that. So what we're going to do immediately, the first thing we've done is we've asked Susan Spear, who's on our executive team here on the 9th floor. If Susan's in the room, please identify yourself. Susan has worked previously in a number of different assignments. She's worked for congressional and U.S. senatorial incumbents. She has, in her own right, has served in the state legislature in another state when she was living there. So she has great background on exposure and all of these things. We've asked her to compile together the information from all of the 45 municipalities, or those that are affected, probably more than the vicinity of 38 or so municipalities that are affected, and to identify all the different projects that might fall underneath this moratorium, so we can understand the economic impact of what we're facing. And then also to dialogue with the municipalities so that they have a direct liaison liaison to the things we're doing at the county government and work in harmony to the best of our ability together. So we're taking on the responsibility that a regional government should, which is coordinate, not dictate, but coordinate a response by all of us together. Otherwise, each of us would be doing it separately, and it would engender time and energy aside from, everyday functioning of local governments. We will be contracting at the county level with some consultancy. We're going to be identifying who the right individual or organization may be. We will deal with it through the Board of Legislators, or Board of Acquisition and Contract, whatever it takes. We'll identify the money where that's going to come from. But we are going to hire on individual or individuals who can counsel us in the actions that we should take collectively on behalf of all the local governments, so that Noam Bramson and Tom Roach and all the other communities don't have to have their own representatives as well and pay for it and do that, and try to have an individuals, an organization that can track all of the different regulatory processes that are involved in this moratorium, understand the legal implications, the operational implementations, and as one entity speak on behalf of all the municipal governments. Now, we've had the great support of Assemblyman David Buchwald, who cannot be here today because he's in Albany, Legislative Session Day, but he has headed the United Westchester group of municipalities that have come together when we dealt with the utility issues last year in the storms Riley and Quinn. We still have outstanding issues with NYSEG regarding that. Meetings are coming up, but David has taken a leadership role in that. He will continue that leadership role. Assemblywoman Amy Paulin and all the members of our state delegation were present at the meeting that we had on Thursday with Con Edison, and they also are taking this very seriously. Amy has previously headed the Energy Committee in the Assembly, and now she heads the Corporations and Authorities Committee, so she has a position of authority. And of course, we have on the Senate side the most powerful state senator in the state, and Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and they are all well aware of our circumstances and the concerns that we have. So we're fortunate to have that as part of this effort. But we still need professionals in the energy area who will be able to look at these issues, be able to comment, report back to us, and then give us their best advice about how we should proceed, when and where we should take which kinds of actions to deal with this. I have tasked Peter McCart, who's with us today. Peter, would you identify? It's right behind me. Okay, thank you. Peter, forgive me for not introducing you in the upfront. Peter's our Director of Energy Conservation and Sustainability. And we've asked Peter to do a survey of the county government itself and how we can reduce the use of natural gases at our county facilities. We have a very diverse real estate portfolio, office buildings in a host of different communities. We run sewer treatment plants. We have certain types of park facilities, a county center, and an airport, and all those different things. And if it is true that Con Edison is telling us that they cannot meet the demand for existing customers and then add on new customers, then it behooves us as a customer of natural gas to determine how do we reduce our use of gas, particularly on those peak days of usage, which apparently is what the real fear is for energy supply. Now, we have already undertaken that program under Peter's leadership regarding electricity with an energy reduction demand program, which we believe is going to generate resources for the county. So in essence, we're going to try to do the same thing now involving natural gas, whether that leads to an interruptible gas service or some other means of conservation. But we're a big enough user in the county. We have to take that step proactively, and we will. And Peter will be tasked with doing the survey so we can figure out what we have to do, and then interacting with Joan McDonald, our Director of Operations, to determine what that looks like in real-world terms for the various facilities that we have. And I presume what will come out of our common effort will be similar efforts within the municipal governments of Westchester County. Now, some governments are fairly small holdings, some of them are larger, but to the extent that we can all collectively reduce our use of natural gas, we're hopeful that that reduction of gas, particularly in peak times, may allow the opportunity for us to use the existing amount of gas, natural gas that comes into the county sufficiently to apply for additional hookups, but we'll see how that plays out. I've asked Joan McDonald to reach out to John Rhodes from the New York State Public Service Commission. Joan, as you know, I've said her resume every time she's been standing up here. She's a former state commissioner of transportation. She understands the state government executive branch function exceedingly well, understands how it works, knows the players personally, and I've asked her to reach out to John Rhodes to get an understanding of what the power of the PSC is, and ultimately, at the very least, to delay the implementation of any moratorium, to give us time to work in being part of an action plan that can, in some way, shape, or form, respond to this more effectively. A March 15th deadline is just far too soon for all of us to be able to do what we have to do. Joan will have that conversation with the PSC. We'll see what kind of response we get out of that. The PSC has identified that they have a hearing set for the week of February 11th. That's next week. And I intend to testify at that hearing. I suspect Mayor Roach and Mayor Bramson, Mayor Mike Spano, who couldn't be with us today, but expressed a great interest in this issue, in this area, to do that. And then my colleagues on the Board of Legislators, each of whom have committees of jurisdiction that to some degree overlap this policy issue, under the direction of Ben Boykin. We're also joined by Dennis Power, the Chief of Staff at the legislative branch, that legislators and ourselves will be testifying at that, and primarily to show what the impact of this moratorium would be, and that the time frame of the implementation of this moratorium will be particularly difficult for us to deal with, because there just isn't enough time for us to come back with an alternate strategy that would be effective and something we can implement in real time so that we can avoid this. Our intent is to work with all players in the game. We'll reach out to the business community. We understand that the Business Council of Westchester has a meeting and some announcements they'll be making later on today. We will work with all of the other players in the game. We reserve the right to take the policy positions that we believe are wise, but we will work with everybody so that this is a united effort to try to deal with this moratorium to the best of our ability. And we're mindful that there are environmental considerations that go into this. This is not simply, oh my God, we need more of this, so let's immediately do that. We're going to have to be very careful, because our environmental concerns for the future are real. And we cannot let a moment of crisis be responded to by not being realistic about the long-term implications of fossil fuels and so forth. I think we can find a path to work through this. That's what we're going to try to do. And the county is not doing this with the authority to impose an answer on this. We do this collegially. We work cooperatively in this administration with the legislative branch. We work cooperatively with the municipal governments that we serve alongside of. We are not the superior government to the cities, towns, and villages. We are a brother, a sister government, also local governments, also chartered by the same state. We know that our state legislators are motivated on this issue. We want to make sure that there's similar motivation in the executive chamber, and I'm sure there is in Albany. And ultimately, they hold the executive authority to be able to help us dramatically on this. But with all of those thoughts in mind, our response is our initial response. Subsequent to the meeting last Thursday, we intend to implement these activities with the support of our colleagues. So I'm next going to ask Mayor Tom Roach of the City of White Plains to share some of his thoughts, and he will be followed by Mayor Noam Bramson of New Rochelle, and then I'll continue to traffic our conversations. Mayor Roach.
Thank you, George. And I want to start out by saying that the county's executive leadership on this issue has been tremendous, as it has been on many issues since he took office. And when he refers to collegiality, he's not kidding around. I actually, no one on this platform needs to be introduced to each other. That is not the case in every community. We all work together all the time on different things. And I think that collegiality means that in times of crisis, things can be more effectively handled. I got the call in about 3 o'clock in the afternoon from a representative from Con Ed, who we deal with all the time, and I was like checking my ears, you know, when I heard what she was calling about, and so she said, call back when you have it, whenever you want, any questions you have. So as soon as I got off the phone with her, I got on my phone calling my commissioners and staff, and 15 minutes later we called Con Ed back when we had everybody assembled in the room, it was a shock, but as we have learned more, we think that the impact on existing projects, at least in White Plains, is not going to be great. But I do think this is a wake-up call, and I pretty quickly came over to the idea that this is an opportunity to accelerate the transition to renewables, which is where we're headed anyway. And if you look at the cost, it would involve to bring in another pipeline for what is going to be an outdated fuel and outdated technology. Instead, take that money and apply it to conservation, incentivizing homeowners, incentivizing businesses to rehab their buildings and use less energy, and incentivizing new projects, because these are big projects, to make use of renewables such as geothermal with heat pumps. That's going to have to be, I think there'll have to be some incentives. Hopefully the state will get involved. The state has laudable goals for going fossil free, and I think here's a real opportunity to get the ball rolling in that. I just want to point out that we got this news, and first thing the next morning, my cell phone rings, and it's Mayor Spano from Yonkers calling. He'd spoken to Mayor Bramson, and we wanted to get together. Like, we're talking to each other about what we're experiencing, what we're hearing. We had a meeting together, and then after the big county meeting, we had another meeting with Con Ed. Obviously, Yonkers, White Plains, and New Rochelle are most impacted by this right now. Everyone's impacted, but we all have a lot of projects going. And I just want to express the value there is, I mean, the relationships between the mayors, the ability to work together on these things. It's really not a combative or competitive environment. It's a collegial environment, as the county executive indicated, and I think we all benefit from that. So, you know, one of the issues that I think should be pointed out is that firm gas moratorium, but if you're interruptible, then you get your hookup. So for a lot of these projects, that is an option. These are big projects. It's the smaller projects that may have issues with that. The final thing I want to say is, and again, credit to the county executive, part of what we need to do is get that kind of information out and get facts on the table, because you have developers that are looking at projects that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and we have one probably $500 million, and they don't want to build it and then have no way to heat it. I mean, to put it simply. So we need to get the facts on the table as soon as possible so they can make the changes they need to make to keep our economy moving forward. And with that, I'll turn it back to the county executive.
Thank you, Tom. Next, Mayor Noam Bramson, City of New Rochelle.
Well, good morning. First of all, let me echo Tom's words. I think we're very, very fortunate to benefit from the county executive's leadership. It's wonderful to have someone who's not only capable of discussing the issues so fluidly and comfortably, as we heard George a moment ago, but who instantly recognized that this was a regional challenge and it required a coordinated effort in order to approach it intelligently. So I thank you, George, and your entire team for grabbing the bull by the horns. My experience with this issue was quite similar to Tom's. I can relate to that phone call coming in. And, you know, you put it in some context. The cities of Westchester County are right now undergoing a historic process of renewal. In New Rochelle alone, it's $4 billion of new investment that's being contemplated. That's important not only to our own community, it's important to the entire region. And it is years of painstaking effort that has enabled us to finally be in a position where we can attract this investment and move forward. But it is still midstream. It is still potentially fragile. And so to receive this news like a kind of a bolt out of the blue really is, again, I underline the word potential, potentially very, very problematic. And yet I am confident that all of us working together are going to be able to achieve a solution. And as both the county executive and Tom pointed out, this argument that maybe there's some tension between economic and environmental goals, I reject that completely. All of us are strongly committed to transitioning to renewable sources of energy, to a clean electric grid, but the issue is making sure that can occur in an orderly fashion so it doesn't disrupt the economic development that is also enormously beneficial. And also keep in mind, transit-oriented development by its very nature is an environmental initiative. When you have housing that is able to utilize mass transit, which is more energy efficient, which utilizes less energy on a per capita basis, that is an important part of a regional climate action program. And so moving forward with the investment that is occurring in Yonkers and in New Rochelle and in White Plains, it's important not just to our economy, but to our environment as well. I think the framework that the county executive laid out is exactly right. What we need is either some modification of the terms of the moratorium so that it more realistically aligns with the need of construction, and/or a clear explanation of the engineering and financial instruments through which alternative means of heating large projects can be identified, or all of these things combined with a healthy dose of state assistance in order to close whatever financial gap may be necessary in order to make these alternatives viable. But I, again, am confident that we will overcome this problem. So much is at stake. We all recognize what's at stake. I think Con Ed, for their part, also understands that this is something that needs to be addressed. And I hope that the next time we all gather together, it'll be with concrete solutions that can move us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And then finally, I'd like to ask Chairman Ben Boykin from the Board of Legislators, who can outline the legislative response.
Yes. Thank you, County Executive Latimer, and to Mayor Bramson, Mayor Roach. We take this very seriously at the County Board of Legislators. We are going to hold what is called a Committee of the Whole in the very near future, where we invite all legislators to come together with Con Ed. Our Chief of Staff is, as we speak, working on setting that meeting up because this affects so many of us in Westchester County. Actually, I happened to be out of the office and got a call from the Chief of Staff saying, have you seen this? We got this from Tom's chief of staff and from White Plains that this gas moratorium had just been talked about at Con Ed. You know, coming from the business world, you plan. You do a 1-year plan, you do a 3-year plan, you do a 5-year plan. They had to see this coming. You can't, in a month, put this on someone and say, no more hookups after March 15. It will be devastating to the commercial development in Lower Westchester County. Not only that, to homeowners that we have. You know, a lot of homeowners are converting from oil to gas, you know, trying to move up that curve. We know that there are other options. For example, last Thursday they talked about using heat pumps. A heat pump's $40,000. There's probably a $20,000 that you can get in incentives from the state, but still it costs you $20,000. We all want to get to renewable energy sources, but we have to have a thoughtful and well thought out way of getting there. Also in Scarsdale, they're looking to redevelop the Freightway garage that's near their train station. It's going to impact them. Also, they have many homes that they take down and rebuild larger homes. And the question got asked from someone from Scarsdale about that. They take down a small home and replace it with a larger home. And the answer was, we'll supply energy to the existing infrastructure that was there. This cannot be. Okay? And we at the board will work through this, working with the county executive, working with the municipalities to figure out a way forward and ask Con Ed to step back on this and figure out another way that we don't have to, at March 15th, end hookups in Westchester County. Thank you.
So just in summary, before we take any media questions, you know, we're seeing all the time about what's happening in Washington, D.C. and how decisions are made or being not made down there. Here, when we see a crisis, what have we done? We've worked across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats together. There is no partisan divide on this cooperative effort. There is no divide between the executive branch and the legislative branch on this effort. It's a cooperative effort. There's no division between different levels of government. The county is working with the cities, towns, and villages as equal partners in this, and we're working with our state and federal legislators as equal partners. This is not a trade-off, as was said by a number of speakers, of it's either economic development or it's environmental protection. We want to find that point at which both of these priorities can be met in the same way. And we don't look at this as government against business. We need to come back with a response plan that will allow us to function so that the businesses can function properly, but at the same time, the governmental policies that we believe in can work. This is the proper way to respond to a crisis, and to do it in an intelligent and measured way, to do it with professional advice. We're reaching out because we know what expertise we have in-house and what expertise we have to have from outside in to help us do this. So this is where we're heading. And we're happy to take any questions from the media. You can direct them to me or any of our guests, and we're happy to try to respond. Yes?
Can you give us some insight as to what Con Ed said on Thursday? Are they willing to hold off, as you discussed today, or are they sort of trying to push the governor's hand on a natural gas pipeline so that they can, provide more?
Well, in our interaction on Thursday, it was an informational meeting. So they told us what the position of the utility was, and they explained to us why it was the way it was. They didn't offer, nor did we seek at that meeting, any modification to the plan. We all indicated in our various questions and in certain statements that were made how devastating we felt that the plan as is would be. And we indicated, without being confrontational, that we weren't comfortable with accepting the plan, that we were going to push back and move in a different direction, which is what we're beginning today. Con Edison expressed that it was, they said to us that their decision was not tied to the rate case that they've just engaged, which is a multiple month case. They didn't necessarily indicate that it was tied to anything else. Human nature being what it is, people will guess and opine, and I guess that's what Facebook and Twitter is for these days. But from a practical standpoint, if it's within Con Edison's power to implement, then we, which do not have the power collectively to stop them from implementing it, we want to create some alternative plan that will allow for them not to have to implement it. And then we look to the state, which may in fact have the authority to stop the implementation of it, to do so on the basis of there being a plan, and one that we'll try to put together as fast as we can. John?
Yes. How long of a delay are you looking
Well, we haven't established that yet. One of the things which I failed to mention, Joan McDonald just sent me a mind thought of something I missed covering. And it's amazing. Don't kid yourself. You know, she has that sixth sense. What I failed to mention in my general comments, John, germane to your question, is that our planning department is available to work with the local governments in helping to identify the projects that would fall under this. Now, what we were told by Con Edison, I hope I'm reflecting it accurately, is that they would be willing to and accept the fact that there may be a mass rush for applications for hookups to come in now. In whatever state of completion that is, I guess they determine how complete it is. The problem is that every municipality has a regulatory process to go through. They just don't waive zoning and waive planning authority. They go through with a certain amount of scrutiny. And your show's done something very interesting in their circumstance, but there's still a rigor to analyze a project before green lighting it. And if you use March 15th as the drop-dead deadline for that process to happen, then it's not possible for any of the municipal governments to do the full due diligence before they say, go ahead, yes, you can do that particular project. That affects us, by the way, not only in terms of private sector market projects, it affects all of our efforts for affordable housing. Our administration has made a commitment to move forward on affordable housing in an aggressive way. We have an affordable housing study that we expect to have the results of within the next 60 days, which will identify what that need is. And the need is going to be for more affordable housing units. And the developer of an affordable housing project is not yet identified to satisfy those projects, and they would miss the March 15th deadline on its face. So we don't have an alternate deadline in mind. This is when we contract with an expert person in the energy field who has legal knowledge and operational knowledge. They may be able to advise us that, yes, you could put a plan together, and if the moratorium were extended 180 days, 6 more months, that it wouldn't affect them. My understanding is that their peak use of natural gas comes in the wintertime because it's primarily for heating purposes, unless everybody decides to cook on the stove at the exact same time. So mostly it's a heating situation. Once we get through the coldest months of the year, they don't reach that maximum capacity situation. So it may be that we can look at a later date for moratorium to come into play, allowing us enough time to have energy reduction strategies that would be significant enough to work with, and at the same time that the process that Mayor Bramson and Mayor Roach and Mayor Spano, and by the way, all the other municipalities too, everybody's got certain things on the line. The transit-oriented development is just as live in Tarrytown and Portchester as it is in the bigger cities. That will allow them more time to do their planning due diligence. We just announced 2 weeks ago the North 60 project, which will involve tremendous infrastructure. There is no way that project happens without access to, electricity, water, sewerage, gas, or whatever else is going to be the alternate medium. So, and there's no way that will ever be done by a March 15th date. So the intent is to have our consultant advise us, advocate for us, and then advocate directly in the PSC, and then the PSC steps in, because that's their job, is to protect the public on these kinds of issues. And then that would be probably the source where you would find either an alternate date or an alternate plan of a moratorium implementation. Go ahead and follow up if you'd like.
In my conversations with Con Ed, one, they have sort of a perfect storm besides the rate hike. I think on February 7th, they have a hearing on their, I think it's $305 million Smart Solutions program, which is also sort of non-gas, non-natural gas, trying to offset that energy load. But in my conversations with them, they were saying that even if that whole plan was approved, they still would have imposed the moratorium. And that also this is not just a Westchester issue, that eventually this could branch out into other areas of down to the metro area, into New York City. So,
well, that may be true, but eventually the Jets will get good. For right now, the Patriots are winning Super Bowls. So for right now, it's Westchester that we're worried about.
Do you think that the Public Service Commission has the power to force them not to impose this?
I don't know if they do or don't, and that's part of what our due diligence will be. We've asked our county attorney, John Nona, who in his previous life was a significant litigator in the private sector, major partner, major law firms, to opine. But that's why I think we want somebody with specialty knowledge to be able to look at this and make that determination. And I'm sure when Joan and John Rhodes have a sit down, he'll have a pretty good, John Rhodes, who's the chairman of the Public Service Commission for New York State, he'll have a pretty good idea of what they think they can and can't do. But we're approaching this process from a multifaceted point of view, John, not knowing which particular road gets us where we want to go, but assuming if we work down all of these roads and other ideas that are yet to surface to try to attach it.
Would legal action be a possibility as well?
Look, everything's always on the table. You know, you never say, I won't do this or I won't do that, but you don't want to lead with anything like that. You want to lead with, can we find a cooperative way to satisfy whatever the problems of meeting peak demand are in a way that will allow us to continue to allow these hookups to happen. That would be the ideal situation, and then ultimately wean ourselves off of these energy systems. Yes, John.
Did Con Ed indicate to you that the infrastructure they want to build with this new price increase over the weekend would not be used to improve natural gas capacity?
Well, they didn't make any particular correlation in our meeting as to what the price hike situation. They alluded to it. They indicated they put it in the hopper. How long that process is going to take, 6 months, maybe a year before there's an adjudication of that. That is within the authority of the PSC. But we didn't see any sort of layout. If you pass this plan, then we can create such and such an infrastructure. The PSC has separately, or the state, and whatever the function is, has separately made decisions on pipeline expansion or not, separate and distinct from the ratepayer decisions. And so, you have to assume the PSC, with those authorities, has leverage with the utility. How they use that leverage is going to be subject to issues that are frankly much bigger than Westchester. But since Westchester, relating to what John said, is the only place they're talking about a moratorium. Now, they alluded to the fact, in time, the issues on Long Island are going to be problematic. Well, again, that's down the road. Right now, it's Westchester they've identified. They didn't say they were going to do this in the Bronx. They didn't say they were going to do this in New York City or Manhattan. They said they were going to do it in Westchester. So whatever the rate hike would be would cover all of their ratepayers throughout their whole service area, not just in Westchester. So they must have, and I'm sure they do, a robust plan for capital projects and stuff. They sure tore up a lot of streets that I drove on this summer to try to replace and improve pipes. But no, there's been no correlation between the rate case issue and the capital that they would commit to and whether that would resolve this problem or not. Other questions that anybody else may have? John again?
Sort of for the mayors and for the county executive, there's always, in economic development, there's always sort of a window of opportunity for new construction, new development. The last sort of recession, about $3 billion worth of projects in Yonkers never broke ground because all of a sudden the timing just didn't work out and the projects never moved forward. In the case of New Rochelle, I think you saw that and expedited approvals. Are you at all concerned, despite all the reforms that's gone on in White Plains and in New Rochelle, you have these projects that are in the pipeline, that all of a sudden this, if allowed to continue, could basically tell investors to walk away?
Let's have Noam and Tom come to the microphone.
Am I concerned? Of course. You're right. I'm still traumatized by our experience last decade when we had a great head of steam and it all fell apart when the economy tanked. And you put it exactly right, John. There are windows of opportunity during which you can accomplish meaningful things, and those windows can close quickly and in ways that are difficult to predict. And so delay can often produce more than just delay. It can be the death knell of a project that might be enormously positive for a community. Having said all that, I don't feel that at the end of the day, what we're discussing in this press conference is going to end up being a significant obstacle to the investment that we're all pursuing. I think that the range of solutions, potential solutions that have been discussed by every speaker and that will continue to be discussed in the days ahead will provide a path forward for the various projects that we've been that have already been approved and others that are under discussion. There's a danger that merely expressing concern can become self-fulfilling. You know, a lot of investment is based on atmospherics and confidence. And if there's an unresolved obstacle hanging out there that could imperil the risk-reward ratio that every developer needs, that can be enough in and of itself to cancel deals, which is why I think it's important for us to identify what the solutions will be and what the path forward will be in the shortest possible time frame. We're having a meeting in New Rochelle for all of the developers who are working in our community, so they can hear directly from Con Ed and others about what options are available to them. I know the county executive, as he's indicated, is moving forward on these different tracks. So the sooner that we have clarity, the better off we'll be. And the last thing I'll say is we're all very focused on the March 15th deadline for this year. There's another deadline which has gotten less attention, which may be just as significant, and that is 2 years from now. That's when the hookup needs to actually be physically introduced. And that may be more problematic because construction timetables being what they are and the uncertainties that are always associated with construction, 2 years may be a little bit too tight. So that is among the things we have raised with Con Ed. That's an area where a little bit of flexibility could go a long way in making sure that the negative impacts of the moratorium are not actually realized.
Thanks. I agree with what Noam is pointing out. It is, I've been in this now long enough to remember the last boom. And when the boom ends, it doesn't happen, it doesn't fade out. It's like a light switch. It goes from 5 projects are going to nothing. And that's why, as mayor, and I know this has been Mayor Brampton's approach, you want to keep your projects moving. It's a rigorous review process. We're very exacting, but you want to be efficient because of just, so I'm happy about the projects we have well along that are less likely to be impacted. But it's another reason not to dawdle. I would say these are vital not just for the economy now, because they do provide a lot of jobs when they're going up, but the whole concept of people wanting to live in cities and having people living in your downtown, that's what keeps your restaurants alive. That's what keeps your street. Mamaroneck Avenue is doing as well as it is because of all the people that have come to live downtown. Because George made a mention about cooking. You know, hardly anyone cooks anymore. The kitchens are beautiful, but no one uses them. My mother had a tiny kitchen, and she was cooking all the time. They go out to eat. They go out for a drink. They go to the movies. This is vital, not just to today, but for the future. And I think it's vital for the whole state because this part of the state, New York City and Southern and Westchester County, we're drivers for the state, and we are the ones that are in competition with the cities in Connecticut, with the cities in New Jersey. And we're doing well, and we want to make sure we keep doing well. So.
And just to fully over-answer the question, my prior business experience was involved in hotel development at the tail end of my career before I fully committed myself to this path. And what we looked for in any of the deals, there are certain market realities that we had to look for. That was my actual responsibility, is to make the assessment of the market reality for a project. But we also looked for decision makers who we thought were reliable, that we could work with, that could deliver what they said they could deliver in the time frame that they could, because so much was pivoted on that. And the organization that I was a part of walked away from deals where we thought we didn't have those kind of partners. I think what you're looking at in Westchester County now, and it's not indicative of who which person or political party is in charge of a particular municipality, but to the greater extent, the New Rochelle's, the Yonkers, the White Plains, the Tarrytowns, the Sleepy Hollows, where there's a major project going on, the Portchesters, the Mamaronecks. Right now we're going through a period of time where the local decision makers are people of substance. They're reliable. They're trying very hard to show economic drive in their respective communities. And as we said, to do it in a way that doesn't take a virgin piece of land and tear it up for development and pave over what otherwise would be green space, but to do it where you already have the infrastructure of sewer and water and different things. So I think that type of projection, the fact that the mayors are holding meetings to meet with their developers, just as we have a meeting tomorrow to discuss IDA policies and what that's going to mean, because that's really the county's direct involvement in these things, where we have IDA support for any of these developments, that what we're trying to do is show that there's a responsible, immediate response to this issue, and that we're not taking the traditional political response, which is to do press releases attacking the utility. We're not happy with the decision, and we've expressed that in ways privately, and I'm sure publicly if we feel the need to. But notwithstanding, last year when I was upset with the utilities, both of them, because of the way they were responding in an electrical situation, that was in my judgment, it was a justifiable anger. Now we're talking about, here's a problem, how do we solve it, and how do we solve it within the parameters of our philosophy? If we implement at every one of these levels the things we're going to do, if it involves legislation, the Board of Legislators, it does. If it involves state involvement, it does. We're showing a business-like response. And that means that, yes, you can do business in Westchester County, not just with the government of Westchester County, but anywhere in Westchester County, because we understand what it takes to make an intelligent decision, to make it promptly, and to make it appropriately. And that's what we're trying to show. We take this seriously. We're taking action. We're not going off the deep end. We're not using this as a forum to attack. We're not using it to attack each other, attack different levels of government. We want to solve a problem. That's our mission. Any other questions? Okay, John, I think you're going to get the final word unless my friends at FiOS or one of the other entities have something they want to ask. John, the final question.
Where is the Public Service Commission on their decision on what discipline they're going to give NYSEG and Con Ed for their poor performance last spring?
I don't know that I can answer that question at this point. I don't know if any of us can. So I would say, John, we'll hold that in abeyance until we have a more substantive conversation with PSC, which is coming, and hopefully within the next week or so we'll give you an intelligent answer on. I know David Buchwald with United Westchester has been the point response person on that. We have another meeting coming up with NYSEG, because the general sense is that NYSEG has not responded as responsibly to the concerns that were raised after last year's crisis. We did, if you recall, have a press conference with Con Edison late last year in which they indicated certain things that they were doing in terms of equipment and manpower deployment that they felt would better deliver on it. Now, we are here, on February 4th. Our 400th day in office, by the way, as a new administration. And so far, cross fingers, we haven't had the kind of test of the electrical grid system yet, and hopefully we don't have it at all, but to see how those changes have responded to it. But for more detailed answer, we'll make it a point to follow up, and we'll address that when we can.
Do you support the price rate increase?
We're going through a review of the price situation like that. Nobody wants to pay more for anything, so the first reaction is, I don't want to pay more for anything. But we're going to have to review it as everybody else does and determine, as you or somebody else asked before, what are we getting for the additional money? But that's not part of this discussion, and that will play out over a much longer time frame. But we'll get back to you on that once we have a sense of what we want to do. So with that, Allie has a question. Good. See, I waited. I wanted you to be on the,
Quick question. When will PSC meeting was supposed to be?
Week of February 11th. Do we know the specific date? Okay. So which is next week. I don't think we know, but as soon as we know, Catherine Chaffee, who is always diligent, will get a note out to everybody. And you'll know where it is. And if it is in the area and you want to cover it, by all means, if they open it up to public coverage, we'll cover it publicly. Friends, thank you very much. You're welcome to talk to any of our friends one-on-one if you'd like. Thank you.